I'm going to read you a couple of pages from Botolph, where we find the boys in Appledore having just crossed Romney Marsh. During their journey, they'd met Farmer Mosel, who was driving his cart in the opposite direction, but told them to make their way to his farmhouse, where they would be welcome to stay for the night. He expected to arrive home an hour or two after them, but he's now overdue, and a violent storm is brewing. "We'll go and look for him," Botolph suddenly said. "What?" said Luca. "In this? Are you mad?" "Yes, he's right," said Mistress Mosel. "I'm worried about my husband, but you don't know the marsh, and even if you did, it's not safe for anyone to be out there on a night like this. Anyway, if he's had an accident or something, it could have happened anywhere between Folkenstein and Appledray. You wouldn't know where to start looking. I'm afraid that we're just going to have to wait and hope that he arrives home soon. Otherwise, we shall have to gather our neighbours together to make a search in the morning." "The tide's rising, you said so yourself," said Botolph, who had a strange sense of urgency hovering around in his brain. "Tomorrow morning may be too late. I have a feeling that he's not far away, and that we need to go now, and that we shall find him. Come on, Luca, let's get going." "You don't know the marsh," wailed their hostess. "I know the part we walked over today," said Botolph, "and that's good enough for me. God will guide us. You will see." He sounded so convincing that she gave up her protests and instead turned and gave them 2 blankets to wrap around them to keep out the worst of the rain. She then found 2 stout poles and urged them to walk with those, testing the ground in front of every step once they left the Ree wall. The boys set off, and as soon as they rounded the corner of the dwelling, they were hit by the full force of the wind that nearly tore Mistress Mosel's blankets from their backs. Botolph led the way, and Luca followed, clutching his blanket together under his chin and keeping his head down. The gale was from the southwest, and as they crossed the ford, the wind was pushing across them from right to left. The water was noticeably deeper, colder, and more choppy than it had been a few hours previously. As they scrambled out of the water, they climbed up the causeway onto the Ree wall, which left them totally exposed to the gale. Fortunately, there was a full moon, but most of the time it was obscured by clouds. They were racing across the sky so quickly, however, that every so often the moon would appear and cast its welcome light and then vanish again. As he marched forwards, Botolph was having his own private conversation with God, asking for guidance towards what he knew for certain was the stricken farmer. He felt something that he'd never experienced in his life before, the absolute certainty that he was on a God-ordained rescue mission. It was weird. It was illogical. He could not discuss it with Luca, who already thought him mad. But fortunately, whatever his feelings were, he knew that Luca would follow him into the jaws of death if necessary. And without God's help, he thought ruefully, the jaws of death might well be where they would end up. He glanced behind. Luca was still there and gave him a grim nod. He looked forwards again. They were just coming to where the path across the marsh peeled off from the Ree wall. Down they went, slithering along the pathway. Botolph skidded and nearly went over, but collected himself. He checked to make sure that Luca was still all right. Luca, with his low centre of gravity, was having less trouble. Soon they were on flat ground again, and they slowed their pace, prodding ahead with their poles. The moon flashed, and Botolph saw the path ahead and consigned the picture to memory. He increased his speed again. Luca was following Botolph's black shadow. He wanted to shout to Botolph and tell him that this was a really stupid idea, and how about giving up and going back to the farm. But he knew that his words would be in vain and would simply waste time. The outcome would be the same. They would press on, so he might as well save his breath and keep up this plodding march after his friend. One thing was certain, and that was that he was glad he was not out there on the marsh on his own. They had been in the driving rain for nearly an hour. Fortunately, the pathway was comparatively straight, and every time the moon came from behind a cloud, Botolph made a mental note of the terrain ahead and was able to press on quickly without too much fear of falling into a dike. Knowing his friend so well, he was acutely aware of how he would be feeling, and he half turned and shouted, "Not far now!" But his words seemed to be blown away in the wind, and he doubted that Luca had heard him. The problem was that all their senses were under assault from the storm. The noise was phenomenal, and the howling of the wind rose to a crescendo and then fell, and then rose again and again. Botolph's sight was riveted on the glimpses of the pathway ahead, and Luca's sight was riveted on Botolph. They were both aware of the firmness or otherwise of the ground upon which they walked. All of it was slushy, but they were intensely alert to any change that might indicate that they were heading into danger. Luca would rather that they walked more slowly, but Botolph was striding along at what seemed to Luca a reckless pace. What Luca did not recognize was that a sixth sense was driving Botolph along in a state of urgency. He knew that there was not a moment to lose, and that time was running out. But what he did not know was why. Suddenly he stopped, and Luca promptly walked into him, and they both nearly fell. "What was that?" said Botolph. "What?" "A noise. I heard a noise." "Noise? I can hear nothing but noise," grumbled Luca. "Over there. I'm sure I saw something. Oh, please, God, give us some moonlight." God did better than that. There was suddenly a simultaneous flash of forked lightning and an almighty clap of thunder. Luca let forth an expletive that he saved for special occasions. Fortunately, Botolph did not hear it, because by then he was already running towards two shapes, one of which was moving, and one which was not.